This was the moment a mermaid performer was attacked by a Chinese sturgeon during a live aquarium show. The performer, Maria Zelenina, was swimming inside a tank at Xishuangbanna Primitive Forest Park when the massive fish lunged forward without warning and pulled her head into its jaws as spectators watched in horror. She fought free underwater and surfaced in visible distress with her goggles ripped off, suffering from facial bruising, swelling around her eye, and lingering pain that affected her vision, later requiring medical treatment. While there are no confirmed cases of a sturgeon killing a human, the species can grow over 10 feet long, weighs hundreds of pounds, and has powerful jaws capable of crushing bone, meaning a sustained bite or loss of air underwater could easily be fatal. Here's a clip showing the importance of being aware of your surroundings at all times. In the video, a family is unloading their car in what many commenters believe to be a South American country like Argentina. Before going inside, the woman immediately senses something is wrong when a car pulls up directly in front of her. Without hesitation, she runs inside and locks the door just seconds before the men can reach the house. With no access to the home, the men quickly grab items from the family's car, get back in their vehicle, and speed off. In 1985, talk show host Richard Belzer invited Hulk Hogan and Mr. T on his show to promote the first ever WrestleMania. To demonstrate a wrestling hold, Hogan placed Belzer in a front shinlock that instantly cut off blood flow. Belzer passed out within seconds, went limp, and collapsed headfirst onto the studio floor, splitting his head open on live television. He regained consciousness with blood pooling on the stage and later needed stitches.
See, it works. All right, brother.
And now, we'll be right back after this word from you-know-who. We'll be right back.
Belzer later sued Hogan and the WWF for $5 million but settled out of court, reportedly using the payout to buy a house he jokingly called Ches Hogan. In 1945, 12-year-old Paul Cusack was reported missing after going out to play near his home in Euclid, Ohio. The next morning, his father began searching nearby lots and made a horrific discovery in a storage yard used by a grain company. Paul had been accidentally buried alive beneath an avalanche of thousands of pounds of split peas after heavy sacks of them toppled over and collapsed on top of him while he was playing nearby. This was the moment skydiving student Christopher Jones suddenly went unconscious during what was supposed to be a routine training skydive in 2014. At around 9,000 feet, his body stiffened and began violently seizing in freefall, his head snapping back as he lost all control, tumbling through the air with no ability to deploy his parachute. Realizing what was happening, instructor Sheldon McFarland chased him down mid-air, fighting the wind and closing the distance with mere seconds to spare. McFarland eventually managed to grab Jones, stabilize his limp body, and pull his ripcord just in time, preventing a horrific fall that would have instantly been fatal. If you're a bad person who's afraid of heights, here's a sneak peek of what hell looks like. During a sudden storm at Six Flags Mexico in August of 2024, riders on the Sky Screamer swing ride found themselves trapped nearly 250 feet in the air as heavy rain and strong winds moved in. Instead of descending, the ride's automatic safety systems activated and locked the chairs in place, leaving passengers suspended high above the park with their legs dangling as powerful storms intensified around them. For roughly 10 minutes, riders were forced to remain exposed to the storm with no control over the situation, unsure of what would happen next or if the ride would be struck by lightning. Eventually, the ride was safely lowered once conditions stabilized and no physical injuries were reported. Lacey Fletcher was a 36-year-old woman from Slaughter, Louisiana, who was found dead in January of 2022 after years of being left to rot on a couch in her parents' home. She suffered from severe autism and was reportedly nonverbal. When authorities arrived, Lacey's body was fused to the sofa, surrounded by years of human waste, insects, and mold. She only weighed about 96 pounds, had bed sores that exposed bone, and was covered in feces and maggots. Coroners ruled her death a homicide caused by severe neglect, starvation, and untreated medical conditions. Investigators determined she had likely been left in the same position for at least 12 years, slowly melting into the sofa while her parents lived in the house with her. Despite the horrific condition of her body and the prolonged suffering, her parents were initially charged with second-degree murder, but the charges were later reduced and ultimately dismissed by a judge in 2024, since the judge ruled that prosecutors couldn't prove that Lacey's parents intended to kill her or knowingly caused her death, triggering widespread public outrage over how such prolonged extreme neglect could result in no prison sentence. Here's a terrifying clip of a Ukrainian soldier showing symptoms of rabies. Throughout the video, he tries to drink water but physically can't. This reaction is called hydrophobia, one of the clearest signs that rabies has reached the brain. Rabies is one of the deadliest diseases known. If treated immediately after exposure before symptoms appear, it's almost always preventable. But once symptoms like difficulty swallowing, confusion, or agitation begin, the virus has already caused significant neurological damage. At this stage, survival is so rare that statistically, a person has a better chance of surviving a gunshot wound to the head than surviving symptomatic rabies. There's no proven cure, and death is usually inevitable once symptoms appear. In July of 2025, 43-year-old Clinton Brink and his wife Kristen were hiking with their 2 young daughters, ages 7 and 9, at Devil's Den State Park in Arkansas when they were suddenly attacked on a remote trail by a stranger armed with a knife. Witnesses later described the man as having an unsettling death stare before he suddenly launched the assault without warning or provocation. Clinton immediately fought off the attacker to buy time for his family to escape, while Kristen ran the girls to safety and then returned to help her husband. Both parents were fatally stabbed during the struggle. The children were later found uninjured about a half a mile away, having been protected by their parents' final acts of bravery. A 5-day multi-state manhunt later ensued after investigators discovered blood at the scene that didn't belong to either victim. The suspect, 28-year-old teacher Andrew James McGann, was eventually located and arrested at a barbershop in Springdale, Arkansas, where he was in the middle of getting a haircut to alter his appearance. This was the moment an Indonesian conservationist broke down in tears after finally witnessing one of the rarest flowers on Earth bloom. After searching the rainforests of Sumatra for 13 years, Diki Andriki and his team found a Rafflesia, a parasitic flower often nicknamed a corpse flower because it releases a powerful odor of rotting flesh to attract insects. The plant spends most of its life hidden inside a host vine and only blooms for a few days, making sightings incredibly rare as researchers never even see one in their lifetime. When the massive, foul-smelling flower began to open in front of him, the weight of more than a decade of dangerous jungle expeditions and failed searches finally hit. This is one of the rarest atmospheric events ever caught on video. Upward lightning erupting from the summit of Volcán de Agua in Guatemala. The bolts appear to tear straight out of the volcano, making it look less like weather and more like something unnatural unfolding in real time. Unlike normal lightning that strikes downward from clouds, this phenomenon shoots upward from the ground into the storm above, triggered by intense electrical imbalance. It's so uncommon that storm chasers never even see it once in their lifetime, and it's almost never captured this clearly over a populated city. Here's some extremely rare footage of a giant squid feeding on a much smaller squid. For centuries, giant squid were dismissed as pure myth, nothing more than sailor legends like the Kraken. Their existence wasn't even scientifically accepted until 1857, and humans didn't film one alive in the deep sea until 2012. Even today, they remain among the least observed large animals on Earth. They live thousands of feet below the surface in near total darkness, and almost no one in history has ever seen one actively hunting, let alone captured it on video. Here's an extremely rare compilation of wild animals shedding their antlers. Antlers are one of the fastest growing bones in the animal kingdom, and unlike horns, they're designed to fall off and regrow every year. While antlers are growing, they're covered in a soft, blood-rich skin called velvet that supplies oxygen and nutrients to the developing bone. Once the antlers reach full size, rising testosterone levels cut off that blood supply, the velvet dies, and the animal rubs it off against trees and brush to expose the hardened bone beneath. After mating season ends, hormone levels drop again, the bone weakens at the base, and the entire antler eventually detaches and breaks away. This cycle allows deer, elk, and moose to grow a completely new set of antlers each year, often larger than the last. Here's a photo of a 71-year-old man in profound distress outside a burning residential complex in Hong Kong on November 26, 2025, after telling reporters his wife was trapped inside as smoke and flames engulfed the high-rise towers. The blaze began in the afternoon at a nearby housing estate and quickly spread through bamboo scaffolding and flammable renovation materials, consuming 7 of the 8 apartment blocks and sending dark plumes of smoke into the sky. Authorities later confirmed the fire became one of the deadliest residential blazes in Hong Kong history, with the final official death toll reaching 168 people, including a firefighter. In 2003, at the Toledo Hospital in Ohio, a man named Paul Fudach Jr. donated one of his kidneys to save the life of his sister, Sarah. Surgeons successfully removed the healthy organ and placed it in a sterile container as they prepared for the transplant. But while it sat unattended outside the operating room, a nurse found the container, did not realize it held a donated human kidney, and mistakenly threw the $250,000 organ into a medical waste bin. By the time the error was discovered, the kidney had been contaminated and had to be destroyed. Paul had undergone undergone major surgery for nothing, and Sarah lost her chance at a life-saving transplant. She did finally receive a donor kidney months later as the hospital admitted fault, paid a settlement, and rewrote the organ handling procedures after the incident. In 2022, in Rockdale, England, police were searching for 18-year-old Joshua Dobson, who was wanted for stealing a car, driving while disqualified, and failing to pay for fuel. When police arrived at his home to arrest him, they found no sign of him, but they noticed a giant teddy bear sitting in the room that appeared to be subtly moving as if it were breathing. Suspicious, police approached the stuffed animal and discovered Dobson hiding inside of it, having cut it open and climbed inside in an attempt to evade capture. He was immediately arrested at the scene and later sentenced to 9 months in prison for the offenses. In 2023, 44-year-old Shikundi Tati of Maryland was arrested after police say he disguised himself as a woman to gain access to women's locker rooms at various gyms across the region. Investigators allege he secretly recorded women while they showered, using the disguise to avoid suspicion. The case came to light after gym members reported consistent suspicious behavior, leading to an investigation that uncovered the hidden recordings and led to his arrest. A UK woman who was taking a nap with her mouth open ended up in the hospital for 3 days after her daughter's dog dropped a deuce in her mouth. This is what a rabies patient looks like when they've already developed symptoms. Rabies causes hydrophobia, where attempting to drink or even just looking at water causes intense clenching throat spasms. This is why rabid animals are often seen foaming at the mouth. Sadly, once a patient reaches this point, there's a 99.9% chance that they will die. This January, California man Dharmesh Patel was charged with attempting to murder his family by driving their Tesla off a cliff. But the entire family ended up surviving the 250-foot fall due to the near-perfect safety rating of Tesla cars. 26-year-old Bella Kilmartin has a rare condition that sends her body to sleep when she experiences strong emotions. She once almost drowned in a pool after laughing at a joke caused her to pass out. The euthanasia coaster is a concept for a steel roller coaster designed to kill its passengers. It was created by Lithuanian artist Julijonas Urbanas, who says the goal of his concept is to take lives with elegance and euphoria. The 7 loops put the body under so much stress that the brain is starved of oxygen, since the heart will struggle to pump blood against the tremendous G-force. It's meant to be a fun way to die. Due to the skin's elasticity, it would take 3 full rotations to completely remove the human head. Don't ask how I know that. For the average adult, there are about 10 pounds of organisms living in and on you that are exclusively not you. There was a form of medieval torture where the victim's feet were covered in salt and a goat would start licking them. Known as tickle torture, it would become extremely painful once the skin was worn away by the rough tongue of the goat, creating a wound with salt slowly trickling in. After Carrie Fisher passed away in 2016, her ashes were placed inside of an urn shaped like a giant Prozac pill. The giant pill was apparently her favorite possession, since it was a reference to her battle with bipolar disorder. This famous mummy appeared to be satisfying himself during his final moments in 79 AD. In medieval Germany, a divorcing couple could legally settle their disputes with a marital duel. The man was given a weapon but had to fight out of a hole with one hand tied behind his back, while the wife could move freely with the rock-filled sack but had to wear weighted clothing. If the husband lost, he was beheaded. But if the wife lost, she was buried alive. Kidum Cave in Kenya is believed to be the original source of Ebola and Marburg, 2 of the deadliest diseases known to man. A 2007 expedition found evidence that the vector species was most likely the African fruit bat, or more specifically, their guano. Either way, the cave is known to scientists as one of the most dangerous places on the planet. In 1991, a decomposing woman was found hanging from a shower in a New Mexico motel room. Despite an image of her being found in the room, she and the man in the photo still remain unidentified to this day. Her first name is believed to be Becca, only thanks to an anonymous tip given to police in 2021. The animal that causes the most deaths in the US annually is deer. This is due to them blindly running into roadways, resulting in an estimated 200 deaths per year. The runner-up is bees, wasps, and hornets, accounting for around 60 deaths annually. Tennessee man James Washington was always the prime suspect of a 1995 murder, but there was never sufficient evidence to charge him. That was until 2012 when he was having a heart attack and confessed to the murder since he believed he was on his deathbed. But he ended up recovering and was convicted based on this confession, which he later tried to take back. In 1999, Martin Lawrence collapsed from heat stroke while jogging in heavy clothing to prepare for his role in Big Mama's House. He recovered in the hospital after entering a 3-day coma on a ventilator due to his body temperature reaching 107 degrees. This map published by FEMA shows the potential US targets in a nuclear war scenario. If you're from the Northeast like me, you might want to start building that bunker. This is the unbelievable anatomy of conjoined twins Brittany and Abby Hensel, who are now 32 years old. Notably, they have 4 lungs but 1 rib cage, 2 hearts, 1 liver, 2 stomachs, 1 set of intestines, 3 kidneys, and 1 pelvis. Modern bulletproof vests were invented in the 1970s by pizza shop owner and former U.S. Marine Richard Davis. He came up with the idea after being wounded when a pizza delivery turned into a shootout. He shot himself in the chest nearly 200 times to test his invention. This is an example of a pillory which was used as a form of capital punishment in 19th century China. The man in the photo can't reach his hands to his face, so he must rely on pedestrians to give him food and water like a dog. The device also made it incredibly hard to sleep comfortably, essentially torturing the prisoner until they died from starvation. After Star Wars The Phantom Menace was released in 1999, Jar Jar Binks quickly became the most hated character in the franchise. The backlash was so devastating for Ahmed Best, the actor who played him, that he nearly took his own life. The first chainsaw was invented by 2 Scottish doctors in the year 1780. It was originally used to help open up the pelvis during childbirth. Photo taken of legendary rapper Tupac Shakur just minutes before he was gunned down on Las Vegas Boulevard in 1996. Tupac was hit 4 times and was put on life support at a nearby hospital where he would end up dying a week later. His body was cremated the next day, and members of his rap group Outlaws smoked some of his ashes after mixing them with some kush. Here's a 1907 mugshot of Bertha Baranda after she was convicted of mayhem for slicing off her husband's penis with a straight razor. In 1939, Gone with the Wind actress Hattie McDaniel became the first ever African American to win an Oscar. When she was dying from cancer in 1952, her final wish was to be buried in the Hollywood Forever Cemetery in LA. But the request was ultimately denied since the cemetery had a strict all-white policy at the time. In 2003, a skeleton measuring 6 inches long was found in a remote part of Chile's Atacama Desert. Due to its elongated skull and rather developed bones considering its size, the specimen was initially rumored to be an alien. But after extensive testing, scientists determined that it was more likely the skeleton of a stillborn human girl that had close to 70 different genetic mutations. According to a recent study, people in the US who were born before 1996 have a slightly lower IQ than those born afterwards. This is due to the negative effects of leaded gasoline, which was finally banned completely on January 1st, 1996. Mickey Rourke was a heartthrob of the 1980s until he quit his acting career to become a boxer. But after multiple facial injuries and botched plastic surgeries, he now looks like he's wearing a mask of someone else's face. Earlier last year, an Alabama man was arrested for criminal littering after putting flowers on the grave of his fiancée who died in a car crash in 2021. While filming an episode of Storage Wars, Daryl Sheets once discovered a dead body wrapped in plastic. Police later determined that the previous owner had murdered his wife and locked her body in a storage unit. Serial killer Edmund Kemper became friends with the very police officers that were investigating him. They called him Big Ed at the local bar and never would have suspected him in 1,000 years. When he initially confessed to being a serial killer, they laughed at him because they thought he was pulling a prank. Herdebeest devoted his life to developing a suit that could fend off a grizzly bear, and was even permitted to go one-on-one with a 320-pound female grizzly. But sadly, he died in a car explosion just days before he was able to test out the design. It's rumored that when a pope dies, it's tradition to hit him in the head with a silver hammer to ensure that he's dead and not just sleeping. A pet Sphinx cat named Jazzy Purrs had to have both her eyes removed and now looks like a spooky skeleton cat. The skin of certain fish species can be grafted onto severe burns and diabetic wounds. The material recruits the body's own cells and is eventually converted into living tissue. Located in Paris, this is the tomb of legendary scientist Marie Curie. It's lined with an inch thick of lead since her remains are still radioactive to this day. A Nile crocodile named Gustave has killed as many as 300 people in Burundi over the last 50 years. He's evaded dozens of capture and murder attempts as he can be identified by the 3 bullet scars on his body. The 2,000-pound monster croc is already nearly 20 feet long and is said to be still growing to this day. As a heavy user, he would swallow handfuls of pills without even knowing what they were. In 2007, he once overdosed on so much methadone that doctors informed him he was only 2 hours away from dying. It was such a wake-up call that he quit drugs almost immediately and has remained sober ever since. American soldier Henry Gunther was the last man to die during World War I. At 10:59 a.m. on November 11, 1918, he bravely charged at a German roadblock filled with armed soldiers. The Germans tried waving him off, knowing that the armistice would be signed within a few moments. But he apparently got too close, fired a couple rounds, and was killed instantly. In 1871, Ohio lawyer Clement Vallandigham was defending a client who was charged with murder. While showing the court how the victim might have accidentally shot himself, Clement accidentally shot himself. He won the case, but he died. 1994 photo shows O.J. Simpson holding hands with his children at the funeral of their mother and his ex-wife, Nicole Simpson Brown. She was brutally stabbed to death, most likely by O.J. himself, even though he was famously acquitted in court a few months later. During the funeral, O.J. reportedly spent a significant amount of time with Nicole's body and was even seen kissing her on the lips. While on his deathbed and completely unable to speak due to throat cancer, famous author Aldous Huxley wrote his final request to his wife to be given 100 micrograms of LSD. So she injected him with 2 separate doses of acid, and he died just a few hours later while tripping balls. Named the Merchant of Death, Russian arms dealer Victor Bout rose to power after the fall of the Soviet Union in the early 1990s. Using his fleet of 60 cargo planes, the arms he's brokered have helped fuel conflicts in countries including Afghanistan, Angola, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Somalia, Rwanda, Liberia, Sudan, and Sierra Leone. Willing to sell weapons to anyone who wanted them, Bout has supplied both sides of multiple civil wars and is said to be responsible for the deaths of tens of millions of people. He was arrested during a sting operation in 2008 where he was caught selling surface-to-air missiles that would have been used to kill American troops. But Victor Bout is now free thanks to a prisoner swap for WNBA player Brittany Griner, who was arrested 6 months ago after trying to bring a THC cartridge on a Russian airplane. Robin Kelly, who played Eric's sister on That 70s Show, had a major drinking and drug problem. She was soon replaced on the show and ended up dying of an overdose while in rehab. In 2012, a Missouri family sued the previous owners of the house they purchased after brown recluse spiders started bleeding from the walls. An expert estimated that the house was infested by at least 5,000 of the venomous spiders. In 2020, a Florida man was arrested for allegedly sticking his hand in peanut butter and punching his neighbor who was allergic to nuts. Just last Friday, Idaho Governor Brad Little signed a bill that would allow firing squads to execute death row inmates when lethal injection drugs are unavailable. This is because it's becoming increasingly difficult to obtain these drugs since pharmaceutical companies don't want their products to be associated with killing people. Right. As part of a grim psychology experiment starting in 1961, triplets Edward Gallen, David Kelman, and Robert Shafran were separated at birth. They were placed with adoptive families who were lower class, middle class, and upper middle class, none of whom were aware of the other siblings or any part of the experiment. According to their adoptive parents, as babies, all 3 of them would bang their heads against the bars of their cribs in distress. This was likely the result of severe separation anxiety, which continued on as the boys got older. By the time they were college age, David and Edward had been in and out of psych wards, while Robert was on probation after his connection to a 1978 murder. A few years later, they were reunited through happenstance but never fully recovered from their mental health issues. In February of 2013, Canadian tourist Elisa Lam went missing while staying at the Cecil Hotel in Los Angeles. Weeks after her disappearance, police released footage of her last sighting as taken by an elevator surveillance cam. In the video, Elisa can be seen looking outside the elevator and jumping back in, almost like she was trying to hide from somebody. She then proceeds to make incredibly strange hand gestures as if she's trying to feel something that isn't there. Soon enough, guests at the hotel began to complain about low water pressure in their rooms. Some even claimed to management that the water was black and gave off a strange smell. Upon investigating, authorities finally found Elisa's body floating in one of the hotel's water tanks 19 days after she first disappeared. Her death was ultimately ruled an accident, with bipolar disorder being a significant factor. This is a photo of a captive orca whale named Tilikum staring down its trainers at SeaWorld. There have only been 4 human deaths caused by orcas to date, and Tilikum was responsible for 3 of them. In one instance in 2010, 40-year-old Don Brancho leaned over his tank during something known as a relationship session. That's when the 11-ton orca took her in his mouth, dragged her into the water, and violently killed her in front of hundreds of terrified tourists. Even when SeaWorld staff members had trapped and netted him, Tilikum refused to let go of the body. It's believed his hostility was caused by a total accident that happened just minutes prior to the attack. Tilikum performed a trick that Dawn didn't see, so she didn't reward him with fish as she normally would. This, coupled with the psychological damage of living in captivity, resulted in the orca's unnatural aggression. As part of a fundraising publicity stunt in 1986, United Way released 1.5 million balloons in Cleveland, Ohio. But the event resulted in utter disaster since the balloons clogged various waterways and even shut down an airport. They also interrupted a Coast Guard search for 2 missing boaters who were later found to have drowned. As a sign of mourning, ancient Egyptians would often shave their eyebrows when their cats died. David Gaines earned 5 bachelor degrees at the same time at the University of Connecticut, but he sadly drowned and died just a few months after graduating because he never learned how to swim. If you ever have a kidney stone, just take a ride on Thunder Mountain in Disney World. After hearing rumors, a Michigan urologist took kidney models filled with stones on the ride. He found that the stones were passed up to 70% of the time depending on where he sat. Donda West was turned down by many plastic surgeons before she found one who would perform on her despite her heart condition. Sadly, as a result of the surgery, she died the next day, and Kanye has blamed himself ever since. The last French soldier to die in World War I was killed just 15 minutes before the ceasefire. He was trying to deliver a message to his unit that soup would be served for lunch. A man from Turkey locked his head in a cage for weeks in an attempt to quit smoking. His wife held on to the key and only opened it for meals and sleep. In 2014, General Motors recalled 2.5 million cars for faulty ignitions. The cars would literally shut off while being driven, so drivers would lose control of their brakes and airbags wouldn't deploy. GM knew about the problem since 2005, but never fixed it because it would be too expensive. And as a result, over 100 people died. An Indian actor named Shyam risked his life to transform for a role. He went 9 straight days without sleep so that the tissues under his eyes would swell up. These photos show what 4 years of fighting in World War II did to the face of a young Soviet man. As the museum caption reads, "The first face looks at you, the second face looks through you." In 2008, Chinese milk company Sanlu tainted their baby formula with melamine so that they could pass quality control. As a result, at least 6 infants died from kidney stones and hundreds of thousands more got sick. This photo shows main culprit Gang Jinping begging for forgiveness during his trial before he was executed by firing squad. It was such a massive scandal that Chinese people still refuse to buy baby formula domestically. 19-year-old Australian Sam Ballard was a star rugby player until he was dared to eat a garden slug at a team party. The slug ended up infecting him with a condition called rat lungworm, which paralyzed him and eventually killed him 8 years later. In 2014, it was reported that Kim Jong-un killed his own uncle by throwing him into a cage filled with hundreds of stray dogs. In Berlin, Germany, there's now a playground on top of the site where Hitler allegedly killed himself during World War II. Serial killer and cannibal Jeffrey Dahmer was brutally killed in prison when another inmate beat him to death with a metal bar. The killer later revealed that he did it because he was sick of Jeffrey making the prison food look like severed limbs to tease the other inmates. Dutch passenger Cor Pan jokingly made this post just months after Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 went missing. Little did he know his own flight would meet a similar fate, as MH17 was shot down over Ukraine, killing everyone on board. Hannibal of Carthage was famous for intimidating his Roman enemies through the use of war elephants. But the Romans eventually learned that elephants are afraid of squealing pigs, so they would lather pigs in tar and set them on fire, sending the enemy elephants fleeing in horror. This is where the term war pigs originated from. Playboy model Anna Nicole Smith didn't receive a single penny when her 90-year-old billionaire husband died. Oil tycoon J. Howard Marshall never included her in his will and left his $1.6 billion estate to his son. If you receive the wrong blood type for a transfusion, one of the symptoms is a sense of impending doom. In 1771, a Scottish woman was sentenced to death by hanging for the crime of hiding a pregnancy. Maggie Dixon was hung, declared dead, and carted off in a wooden coffin. She then suddenly woke up on the way to the graveyard and was later released since her sentence had been carried out. She lived for another 40 years, known as Half-Hang-It Maggie. A 42-year-old British woman received over $70,000 in donations after setting up a GoFundMe to fund her cancer treatment. But it turned out she was a total fraud and was instead using the money to fund her lavish lifestyle and gambling addiction. When Disney released Princess and the Frog, it caused a minor salmonella outbreak across the country. Over 50 kids were hospitalized after kissing a frog. The heaviest human ever recorded weighed 1,400 pounds at his peak. He once lost over 900 pounds only to gain it all back later in life. In 2002, two airplanes collided over Germany, killing all 71 total passengers on board. 2 years later, the air traffic controller who was responsible was stabbed to death by a Russian man named Vitaly Kaloyev, whose wife and 2 kids were victims of the crash. Kaloyev was only sentenced to 2 years in prison and was hailed as a hero back in Russia. In 2019, a British teenager went blind after maintaining a horrendous diet for several years. It consisted of French fries, white bread, Pringles, and the occasional slice of ham. In 2013, Disney abandoned their policy of letting disabled people skip lines at their theme parks. This was because too many people were hiring disabled tour guides to help them skip the lines. These are photos of former Ukrainian President Viktor Yushchenko before and after he was poisoned by Vladimir Putin in 2004. He and his family believe the assassination attempt was ordered because Yushchenko wanted Ukraine to integrate more with the rest of Europe. A doctor chronicled the progression of Alzheimer's disease in one of his patients by collecting her signatures on medical forms over the years. Ever since the Taliban takeover, the price for a kidney on the Afghan black market has dropped from $4,000 to $1,500. This is because so many people have been selling their own kidneys just so they can afford to feed their children. Such high supply of the organ has caused the price to plummet in short time. In 1981, Japanese college student Issei Sagawa invited over his classmate Rene Hartfelt for dinner at his apartment. He told the 25-year-old Dutch student that he would help her translate some poetry for a school assignment, but his real plan was much darker. As Hartfelt was reading from a poem, Sagawa shot her in the back of the head and killed her instantly. He spent the next 2 days eating her flesh so that he could absorb her health and beauty, characteristics which he felt he lacked. It was a plan that was decades in the making, but it only took police 2 days to arrest him. But a French court deported him to Japan, where he avoided serving any jail time due to a legal technicality. He remains free to this day and even says he wants to taste human flesh again before he dies. In 2014, Charles Manson was granted a license to marry 26-year-old self-proclaimed superfan Afton Burton. But the wedding was called off once it was revealed that Burton only wanted to marry him so that she could use his corpse as a tourist attraction once he died. The German pharmaceutical company that produces aspirin once marketed heroin as a pain remedy for children. The 4-penny coffin was one of the first homeless shelters created by the Salvation Army in the late 19th century. For 4 pennies, you could receive food and shelter and could sleep in a coffin-sized wooden box with a tarp. On the right is a photo of the former girlfriend of serial killer Ivan Milat posing on a beach. Unbeknownst to her, she was wearing a sweater that belonged to one of Ivan's victims, which he gave to her as a gift. In the famous first edition of Playboy, Hugh Hefner published nude photos of Marilyn Monroe without her permission. He later purchased the crypt beside her even though they'd never met in life, and now he's buried next to her. The Great Smog of London in 1952 was so bad that pedestrians couldn't even see their shoes. It resulted in the deaths of 4,000 people, many of whom fell into the Thames River and drowned simply because they couldn't see it. In 1998, Tom and Eileen Lonergan were left behind during a diving trip in the Great Barrier Reef. It took 2 days for anyone to even notice before an extensive search was launched. 6 months later, their clothes and gear washed up along with a dive slate that read, "Please rescue us before we die." Their ultimate cause of death remains unknown since their bodies were never recovered. Slovenian woman Julia Adlisic cut off her own hand with a table saw and purposely left it at home when she went to the hospital. She did this to receive $1.2 million in payout from the 5 insurance companies she signed up for. But instead of getting paid, she was sentenced to 2 years in jail for insurance fraud. Anyone who moves to Villas Las Estrellas in Antarctica must have their appendix preemptively removed because the nearest hospital is over 600 miles away. This is an image of a patient with claustrophobia who panicked during a CT scan. This little girl is the stepdaughter of serial killer John Wayne Gacy. Directly under her bedroom was the crawl space where John stuffed the bodies of 26 of his victims, meaning she literally slept over a graveyard. Human injuries from stingrays are extremely rare and almost never fatal. When Steve Irwin was killed by one in 2006, he was only the second reported stingray fatality in Australia since 1945. It was a total freak accident that he only died from because the barb went directly into his heart. In 1921, spiritualists Thomas Bradford and Ruth Doran wanted to test whether it was possible to communicate with the dead. So naturally, Bradford killed himself via carbon monoxide poisoning and planned to appear in front of Doran as a ghost. He never did. In 2014, scientists found a giant 30,000-year-old virus in Russian permafrost. After thawing out, the virus was still infectious and even began killing amoebas. This raised concerns that melting or drilling into Arctic ice could unleash previously undiscovered pathogenic viruses. A Dutch teenager who was going bungee jumping in Spain died after a horrible misunderstanding. The instructor, who had poor English, said no jump, but she heard it as now jump and ended up jumping straight to her death. This is exactly why commands are never supposed to be given with a no or a don't. President JFK's convertible wasn't scrapped when he was assassinated in 1963. They just welded a roof on top and it was used by the next 4 presidents right up until 1977. In 2003, Kenneth Maxwell called 911 to report a house fire that he came across while driving home from work. But his voice suddenly cut off during the call, and when firemen arrived at the scene, Kenneth was found shot dead in his car. It turned out the fire was created to cover up a double homicide, and the killer saw Kenneth making the call. Morticians often use these spiky contacts to keep the eyes of the dead closed during funeral viewings. During World War II, one of the first Japanese cities that the US planned on nuking was its former capital, Kyoto. The only reason it wasn't bombed was because US Secretary of War Henry Stimson spent his honeymoon there and thought it was a nice place. So instead of Kyoto, they went with Nagasaki. Contrary to what was reported at the time, Ronald Reagan lost more than half his blood and came within seconds of dying when he was shot in 1981. His true condition was concealed from the public for nearly 30 years. In an average lifetime, human skin completely replaces itself more than 900 times. A Russian woman named Kristina Ozturk is addicted to having kids and vows to have over 100 by the time she turns 30. She's only 23 years old and already has 11 kids with her 56-year-old husband. In 1967, Soviet cosmonaut Vladimir Komarov became the first person to die in space. His craft had over 200 known flaws, but his attempts to delay the flight were rejected. Had he refused the mission, his friend Yuri Gagarin would have been sent instead. Vladimir specifically asked the authorities to give him an open casket funeral after the mission. Before he became famous, Vanilla Ice claims he survived a brutal stabbing and a near-fatal nightclub attack. When he was 16, he got caught in the middle of a gang fight in South Dallas and was stabbed 5 times, one wound narrowly missing his heart. Doctors reportedly said the blade came so close that another half-inch would have killed him. Months later, he was nearly beaten to death outside a club after a show, leaving him with permanent nerve damage in his arm. This doll, belonging to a 5-year-old girl, has been watching over her gravesite since her death in 1912. In April of 2001, 20-year-old Branson Perry completely vanished from his father's home in Skidmore, Missouri. He told a friend he was stepping outside to put a pair of jumper cables into the shed, but was never seen again. His van, wallet, and all personal belongings were left behind. Despite searches, interviews, and 2 decades of investigation, no remains have ever been found and no one has ever been charged. To this day, Branson Perry's disappearance remains one of Missouri's most haunting unsolved cases. In 2012, Florence Welch of Florence and the Machine nearly died from an undiagnosed ectopic pregnancy, which happens when a fertilized egg implants outside the uterus, usually in a fallopian tube, where it can't grow and can rupture suddenly, causing severe internal bleeding. She went on stage while bleeding internally, thinking it was normal pain, and later learned her fallopian tube had ruptured, leaving what doctors described as a Coke can's worth of blood inside her abdomen. She required emergency surgery to remove the tube and stop the internal bleeding. Florence later said it was the closest she's ever come to dying by far. In 2023, 16-year-old Bryce Brooks from Atlanta jumped into the ocean in Pensacola to save 4 younger kids he'd never met who were being pulled out by a strong rip current. He managed to help get them to safety, but the current dragged him under before he could escape. A family friend, 67-year-old Charles Johnson II, rushed in attempting to save Bryce but was also pulled under. The 4 children survived, but Bryce and Charles didn't make it, and both were later honored as heroes for sacrificing their lives to save others. Trailer Park Boys star Mike Smith, best known as the harmless wide-eyed Bubbles, has been charged with sexual assault in Nova Scotia for an incident that allegedly happened back in 2017, a case that stayed buried for nearly 8 years before finally surfacing in court. The identity of the victim is under a strict publication ban, but Smith is now legally barred from contacting them or going anywhere near their work, home, or school. The charge has forced him to step away from the Trailer Park Boys production company, tainting the wholesome persona millions have associated with him. Deep inside a sulfur-filled cave on the Albania-Greece border, scientists have uncovered the largest spiderweb ever recorded, an enormous 106-meter sheet stretched across the cavern's walls. Hundreds of thousands of spiders from 2 normally rival species have formed a massive cooperative colony, a terrifying behavior never before seen in spiders. The cave's toxic, sunless environment created a self-sustaining ecosystem powered by sulfur-eating microbes which attracted swarms of insects, which in turn supplied this spider megacity with endless food. The web is so dense and vast it looks like the cave is wrapped in ghostly white fabric, proof that life can evolve into something terrifyingly efficient when pushed into extreme conditions. In 2023, British TV presenter Holly Willoughby narrowly escaped a fate straight out of a nightmare. Her stalker, 36-year-old security guard Gavin Plumb, had been secretly building what prosecutors called a murder kit in his Essex home. Ropes, metal cable ties, chloroform, and knives, all carefully organized for a late-night abduction. He spent over 18 months plotting every step, obsessively saving thousands of images of Willoughby, including hundreds of deepfakes he made to fuel his fantasies. Plumb shared his entire plan with someone he met on a dark chat room called Abduct Lovers, where over 100 members spent hours trading violent fantasies. He even sent voice memos describing how they'd hit at night when traffic was low, and how he'd chloroform both of them, referring to Willoughby and her husband. But what he didn't know was that his online partner wasn't a killer, he was an undercover US federal agent. When British police stormed Plumb's apartment, they found his computer filled with explicit material, detailed kidnap instructions, and surveillance notes about Willoughby's security routines. He knew her full schedule and had even written down what time she usually woke up. In July of 2024, Plumb was sentenced to life in prison with at least 16 years before parole. On November 10, 1975, the SS Edmund Fitzgerald, one of the largest freighters to ever sail the Great Lakes, vanished without a single distress call. She was hauling 26,000 tons of iron ore across Lake Superior, a route sailors today still call the graveyard of the Great Lakes. As a brutal storm ripped across the lake, wind gusts reached hurricane force and waves rose over 30 feet. Nearby ships radioed that the Fitzgerald was taking whitewater over the deck, and her radar was down, vents smashed, and one of her lifeboats already torn apart by the waves. At 7:10 p.m., Captain Ernest McSorley made his final transmission, "We are holding our own." Minutes later, the 729-foot ship dropped off radar completely. When search teams managed to locate the wreck 2 days later, the bow was found buried more than 20 feet into the lake bed, showing how quick the ship plummeted through the water. The crew quarters were crushed flat, showing how violently the ship hit the bottom. So fast, the men never even reached their emergency stations. Divers later found crew hard hats still sitting neatly in their storage racks. All 29 crew members were lost, as not a single body was ever recovered. While the exact cause of the sinking still remains a mystery, many experts believe the Fitzgerald was struck by a rare Three Sisters, a set of massive rogue waves that can swallow a vessel in seconds, snapping the large ship in two and sending all 29 men to their graves 530 feet below the surface. In 1995, divers retrieved the ship's bell, the only piece ever brought to the surface, and replaced it with a memorial bell engraved with all 29 names. Every November 10th, it's rung 29 times, one toll for each life lost. In 2010, 77-year-old rancher and hunting expert Don Alejo lived alone on a piece of land near Ciudad Victoria, Mexico, when a local cartel began demanding that he hand over his ranch, a common tactic in the region. They suddenly gave him 24 hours to vacate the property or be killed. Alejo told them he'd think about it, but instead, when the cartel left, he prepared for war. That night, he stayed up fortifying his home. He barricaded doors, moved furniture into firing positions, and set up multiple loaded rifles and shotguns at windows facing all approaches. At dawn, several cartel trucks rolled in expecting an easy takeover, but instead, the gunmen walked straight into a one-man ambush. From inside the house, Don Alejo opened fire with military-level precision. The firefight lasted nearly an hour, and by the time authorities arrived, they found 4 cartel members dead and at least 2 more critically wounded. The house was torn apart by gunfire, and Don Alejo was found inside, killed by return fire, still clutching his shotgun. Mexican Marines who processed the scene later said said it was obvious he knew he wouldn't survive. He had prepared it as a final stand. Don Alejo's ranch was never taken by the cartel, and he became a national symbol of defiance in a region where most people are too terrified to fight back. Victoria Wright was born with cherubism, a rare genetic disorder that causes the bones in the lower face to grow erratically, giving her a swollen, distorted appearance that drew cruel comments from strangers her entire life. The condition can be extremely painful by tightening the jaw, straining the facial nerves, and making basic things like chewing or even speaking very difficult at times. As a child, she endured constant looks, bullying, and even adults snickering about her in public as if she wasn't standing right there. But instead of hiding, she turned her diagnosis into a mission, calling out the cruelty she faced after a BBC documentary sparked a wave of online abuse and becoming a fierce advocate for people with facial differences. In 2015, Mary Cerruti vanished from her Houston bungalow without a trace. 2 years later, the new owners found her skeletal remains sealed inside a wall along with her glasses and shoes. Investigators believe she fell through the attic floor and became trapped, slowly dying alone in total darkness with no way of climbing out. But because she was one of the last homeowners refusing to sell as developers closed in around her, many people still suspect something darker. Her official cause of death remains undetermined. Kim Kardashian's 2018 Met Gala photo, taken in front of the gilded coffin of Nedja Monk, caught the attention of the Manhattan DA's Antiquities Trafficking Unit. When investigators looked into the artifact's paperwork, they discovered the export documents were forged and the coffin had actually been looted from Egypt in 2011. The viral photo helped trigger the investigation that ultimately exposed the trafficking network and led to the coffin being returned to Egypt in 2019. When Yoshitaro Shibasaki and his team scaled Mount Tsurugi in 1907, believed at the time to be Japan's final unclimbed peak, they were stunned to find ancient relics already waiting at the summit. A decorative metal staff fitting and a sword were discovered near the top, and later analysis revealed they'd been placed there over 1,000 years earlier. This 250-year-old mechanical swan still glides and bends its neck as if it were still alive. Built in 1773 by master showman James Cox and ingenious inventor John Joseph Merlin, the automaton uses hundreds of hidden clockwork components to make the bird preen, ripple the water below it, and even snatch a silver fish from the stream. In 1835, a man digging a duck pond in Margate, England, accidentally discovered the Shell Grotto, an underground chalk passage decorated with about 4.6 million seashells arranged across 2,000 square feet of mosaic. Most of the shells, mussels, oysters, scallops, etc., appear to have been collected from nearby Kent beaches, though some are foreign species. Its age, purpose, and creators remain completely unknown. To unlock the secrets of a genius, the man who performed Einstein's autopsy stole his brain and kept it in a jar for 20 years. He found that the part of Einstein's brain that processes math and language was 15% bigger than the average human's. Throughout history, a total of 9 nuclear submarines have been lost around the world. Most of them are still on the ocean floor with nuclear weapons that are still intact. When the Soviet Union was pushing toward Berlin during World War II, a Nazi SS soldier was forced to play piano for his captors. They made it clear to him in sign language that he would be executed the moment he stopped playing. He played for 22 straight hours, after which he collapsed in tears. They congratulated him, then shot him. The details revealed in Michael Jackson's autopsy report were nothing short of disturbing. He was almost completely bald and had a number of cosmetic tattoos, including permanent eyeliner and lip liner. He had puncture wounds all over his arms and had nothing but pills in his stomach at the time of death. Michael had also undergone at least 10 nose jobs, leaving him with a left nostril that was almost completely collapsed. In 1963, the Bronx Zoo had an exhibit called The Most Dangerous Animal in the World. The entire exhibit was just a mirror. Serial killer Richard Chase once attempted to enter a woman's home but walked away after realizing her doors were locked. Chase later told detectives that he took locked doors as a sign that he wasn't welcome, but that unlocked doors were an invitation to come inside. Born in 1661, Charles II of Spain was the result of 200 years of inbreeding that intended to strengthen the family line. He was breastfed until the age of 4 and never fully learned how to walk. As an adult, he was completely illiterate and could barely chew or speak due to his deformed jaw. He was so ugly and disfigured that his own wife was terrified of him. In 2010, a Canadian man rescued a newborn baby from a dumpster only to find out that he was the father. In isolation wards where patients die alone, nurses fill gloves with warm water to simulate the touch of their loved ones. They call it the hand of God. In 1990, British Airways Flight 5390 experienced a window failure in the cockpit, causing the captain to be sucked out. But the crew held on to him for 20 minutes and he miraculously survived despite some frostbite and a few fractures. 18-year-old girl from Alaska was encouraged to murder her best friend by a boy she met online who claimed to be a multimillionaire. She then convinced 4 others to help her so that they could split a $9 million prize. It ended up being a total scam perpetrated by a mentally disabled man from Indiana. The assassin bug wears the corpses of its prey like a backpack. After stabbing its prey and slurping out the innards, the insect uses the corpses as armor and camouflage. In 1991, Patricia Stallings was sentenced to life in prison for poisoning her child with antifreeze. She then gave birth to a second child while in prison, who was given to a foster care. But he eventually became sick with the same symptoms as the first child, indicating a rare metabolic disorder, not poisoning. This proved her innocence and she was released. This is the last known photo of Freddie Mercury before his death in 1991. In order to avoid the attention, Freddie denied rumors about having AIDS until the day before he died. During the Middle Ages, it was believed that sperm produced from the left testicle resulted in having a girl. So to ensure having a son, men would often have their left testicle removed in a painful surgery. In the 1960s, Canadian woodsman Francis Wharton shot a deer and made dentures out of its teeth. He then proceeded to eat the deer with the deer's own teeth. A cat named Oscar correctly predicted the deaths of over 50 patients at a nursing home in Rhode Island. Soon after he arrived at the home, staff noticed that Oscar chose to nap next to patients who would die a few hours later. Nurses would sometimes even place Oscar next to patients they thought would die, but he would move to other patients and be correct every time. Baby Molly Gibson was born in October of 2020, but she was technically 27 years old at her birth, just 2 years younger than her mom. Her embryo was donated in 1992 and stored in a liquid nitrogen tank until she was adopted in 2020 for in vitro fertilization. In 1994, a Russian pilot allowed his 16-year-old son to sit at the controls of the plane, but his son accidentally disabled the autopilot, crashing the plane and killing all 75 passengers on board. From the time of its discovery to its demotion, Pluto didn't even make one full revolution around the sun. If you hit someone with your car in China, you must pay for their medical care for the rest of their life. But if you kill someone with your car, you only have to pay a one-time fee. For this reason, it's common for people to go back and kill someone they accidentally hit. Shortly after going missing for 6 days, Edgar Allan Poe died a mysterious death. When he was found, he was wearing another man's cheap clothing and couldn't explain where he'd been. Acting delirious and distressed, he was brought to the hospital where he died of unknown causes at the age of 40. Bella and Edward's relationship throughout the Twilight series meets all 15 official criteria for an abusive relationship. Up until the 1800s, Turkish women who were accused of cheating on their husbands were tied up in a sack filled with cats, then thrown in the ocean. In 2002, a 15-year-old boy became inspired by the terrorist attacks on 9/11. He decided to steal an airplane and fly it into a building in Tampa, Florida. It ended up damaging only one office room and he was the only person that died. In 1997, Bill Cosby's son Ennis was killed in a failed robbery attempt while he was changing a tire. Cosby was working toward his doctorate in special education and planned on building a school for children with disabilities. In 1971, a thief broke into a home and was shot in the legs by a trap set by the homeowner. The thief then sued the homeowner for damages and won. In 1999, a 26-year-old Polish man murdered his father with a screwdriver before making a mask out of his face. He then put on the mask along with his father's clothes and had his grandfather over for breakfast. Due to his poor hearing and eyesight, the old man swore he was talking to his son the entire time. The crime was only discovered when the grandfather found his son's body and called police. The killer was deemed clinically insane after claiming that the murder was an artistic work. In 1912, President Teddy Roosevelt was shot in the chest just before giving a speech. Upon noticing the bullet missed his lungs, he carried on despite the blood seeping from his shirt. He delivered the full 90-minute speech before accepting medical attention. The first bomb dropped by the Allies during World War II killed the only elephant in the Berlin Zoo. Alfonso Flores from Texas received a major cosmetic surgery to increase his height from 5'11" to 6'1". He claimed it allowed him to finally achieve his dream of becoming tall. In 2009, Larry Maria Moncada from Iowa disappeared after working his shift at the supermarket. He was missing for more than a decade until his body was found when the supermarket was renovated. The man had fallen into a small gap between the wall and cooler, likely dying from dehydration after a few days of being stuck. North Korean founder Kim Il-sung had a baseball-sized tumor on the back of his head that propaganda officials worked hard to hide. As a result, this is one of the only photos ever taken of the tumor. This disturbing drawing was created by a nonverbal dementia patient in a nursing home. A hitchhiking robot that relied on the kindness of strangers to travel the world made it safely across Canada, Germany, and the Netherlands. But just 2 weeks into its American tour, Hitchbot was found in Philadelphia with its arms and head ripped off. If you were to swim near a pod of narwhals and happen to hear one whistle, it might be the last thing that you ever hear. The sounds that narwhals make are so loud that they're said to be deafening to humans. In 2006, a 38-year-old woman who had been missing for 3 years was found dead in her London home with the TV still running. Cats have contributed to the extinction of at least 63 global vertebrate species. They're often considered to be one of the most environmentally damaging invasive predators on the planet. In 2018, a woman who received a lung transplant went into anaphylactic shock after eating peanuts even though she'd never been allergic before. She later discovered that the boy who gave her the lungs had a peanut allergy and actually died from anaphylactic shock himself. Brooke Greenberg was an American woman with an unknown condition called Syndrome X that prevented her from aging. She was 20 years old at the time of her death but never developed physically or mentally past the age of 1. To make a sword from the blood of your enemies, you would have to kill over 300 people to get enough iron. The US military sends many of its doctors to Chicago to give them practice on gunshot wounds. During World War II, the Soviets tried to train dogs to run under enemy tanks with bombs strapped to their backs. However, this plan fortunately ended up backfiring for the Soviets. Because the dogs had been trained using Soviet tanks, many dogs ended up running to them during actual combat, blowing up friendly tanks instead. In 2017, a Utah woman was murdered by her husband while on a murder mystery-themed cruise in Alaska. Many of the passengers thought that the screams coming from their cabin were all just part of the show. Within 3 days of dying, the bacteria in your stomach that digested your food will begin to digest you. Sent to a German mental hospital in 1907, Katharina Drexel made a husband doll out of straw. It's said that she brought the doll everywhere she went, interacting with it as if it were a living person. In 2015, a Scottish farmer reported seeing a car crash on the side of a highway. It took police 3 days to respond, and by the time they did, they found Lamara Bell in critical condition next to her dead partner. She would succumb to her injuries 4 days later due to the negligence. A man named Martin Pistorius once endured a 12-year coma even though he was completely aware of his surroundings. He could see and hear everything, including his mother saying she hoped he would die. But he couldn't show any signs of consciousness and was completely trapped with nothing but his thoughts. In 1965, a machine was patented to deliver a baby using centrifugal force. The machine would spin the woman until the baby came out, and he or she would be caught in a net. In Switzerland, public restrooms are lit with blue lights so that junkies can't find their veins. This is an example of an underground dungeon called an oubliette in Warwick Castle. Prisoners were often dumped in these extremely narrow passages and forgotten about until they starved to death. Many of these dungeons were also placed under privies, meaning the prisoner would be the recipient of all the human waste in the castle. When Mary Ann Bevan was 32 years old, she was a beautiful nurse who was happily married with 4 children. But all of that changed in 1906 when she began suffering from acromegaly, a disease that doctors couldn't quite understand at the time. Mary was experiencing migraines and joint pain that turned into abnormal facial growth and distortion. Within 5 years, she looked like a completely different person and saw her beauty continue to fade with each day. Due to her ugliness, she was eventually fired from her job, and in 1914, her husband Thomas died from a stroke, leaving Anne and the 4 children behind. Desperate to feed her kids, Anne decided to enter a contest and won the offensive title of Ugliest Woman in the World. She was offered a job at Dreamland Circus in Coney Island, where she endured daily ridicule for 13 years until her death in 1933. In 1987, Kenneth Parks drove 12 miles to his mother-in-law's house and stabbed her to death in the middle of the night. But he didn't receive any jail time because Parks' lawyer was able to prove that he was sleepwalking the entire time. The bolt at the top of a helicopter shaft that holds it all together is called the Jesus nut. It got its name because if it fails in flight, the only thing left to do is to pray to Jesus. Viking warriors who were badly wounded were given onion soup to test whether or not they would survive. Someone would smell the wounds after a few minutes, and if onions were detected, it meant that death was imminent. Pedro Lopez is a Colombian serial killer who was sentenced in 1980 after murdering more than 300 young girls. But after serving 18 years in Ecuadorian prison, he was released on good behavior in 1998, and his current whereabouts are unknown.